Hi, Promise Fellow Supervisors. My name is Noam Wiggs, and I'm the Training Development and Evaluation Director. I'm going to be walking you through member hours and timesheets. But just as a disclaimer, this is not normally the work that I do. I'm tagging in to kind of give guidance on these, but these are the thoughtful folks that will be helping on timesheet and member hour stuff throughout the year. I'm sure I will be actively engaging in it, but as we figure out our team, it'll mostly be an intersection of Michaela, Emily, and Rosa, and Kita offers guidance. So right now, here's just more info that you need to know, and there'll be more depth activities and Q&A sessions in our live virtual training. So for timesheets and payroll, most of this is digestible information that makes sense. Essentially, we are bi-monthly. Timesheets are due on the 1st, after the end of the month. And we expect you to be approving them, the day after the Promise Fellow submits it. If a pay period is on a weekend, it would be the following Monday. And then for you, that would be the Tuesday. And honestly, we just ask that everyone be as prompt as possible, and you will get automated reminders from the system. And I'll show you what Encore looks like here in a second. Only other caveat that I really spotlight on this screen is that your person is doing, or your AmeriCorps member is doing a service position. It takes a pay period to get in a pay period, which means that first month can be real tough because it's 30 days until they get paid. The other important thing to know is all this stuff is a permanent record, and you will be going through and approving it. And there is actually a spot where you could type, and we just ask that, within reason that you just put some language that says, see email or see conversation or something like that. Because in this federal sphere, everything is a permanent record. So it's nice if you, do that through like your normal communications, whether that's a phone call, a text, a conversation, etc. Just make sure, we just don't want conflicting problematic pieces, showing up and being part of a permanent record. And this is the categories of timesheets. And this is kind of like your first glimpse of like what Encore looks like if you have not seen it already. This is also prefacing for like the returning supervisors that there are still COVID activities. We are still operating under that COVID support is still needed, and that can be a meaningful service hours, and I'll outline that more in a bit here. But essentially, service is unlimited, whether that's doing the caring adult in-person support for the students that have been identified, or if that's doing COVID activities such as food support or something similar. And then training and Life After AmeriCorps and fundraising are all capped. And that's all just a percentage, or for Life After AmeriCorps, doesn't matter what position, it's just 20 hours of their position. So I can help anyone do the math on that. So for a 1,700 hour person, somewhere around 340 hours, and then it just like works its way down percentage wise. Yeah. And so just to jump into those kinds of hours, by default, you signed up for a person to directly support students. This by and far should be almost all of your person's hours. And so this is anything from supporting students to doing kind of like the admin parts of all of our jobs, of like data tracking, phone calls, all those, activity prep. So within reason, we try to coach people as much as possible, to do as much service, or your AmeriCorps person do as much service as possible. And here's kind of what the COVID additional activities could look like. Please note that this still has to be within the context of like supporting your host site or a nonprofit organization. This can't come through the lens of like for-profit. They can't all of a sudden be, they can't be working for Instacart, as you see the example on the screen. But I would say from my experience this past year, a lot of folks, they might just be doing some only for the students on their list, in which case, if they're doing that support, that is just like the regular service. But if they're doing it building wide, because that's a COVID help that you all need for your school or community setting, then that would fall into like the COVID additional activities. And some of this can kind of get hard to figure out. And so you can reach out and there'll be contact information here at the end. Training. So we will offer training throughout the year. So, when you jump into your first training, in the first couple of weeks, there's a few days of live virtual training through us. You all, I'm sure, will have professional development days, other pieces like that, where you can make sure that your Promise Fellow has thoughtful opportunities to engage with training. And, just please feel free to also engage with those hours. We try to encourage, that training, yes, should happen throughout the year. And it definitely makes sense at the beginning of somebody's role that they have a decent amount of training hours. But I will say, just from my lived experience having this role, is that many people are like, oh, staff meeting, that's training. I'd say that your Promise Fellow might need a little bit of coaching around the fact that, I don't know, staff meetings are a lot of logistics, and there might be pieces that you talked about that are kind of training in the sense that you're learning your job. But, training for all intents and purposes are like, I sent my person to this Check and Connect training, or we're doing this YMCA, like engaging with privilege training, something where somebody is like truly like learning some concept as opposed to just like learning how to navigate my day. Life after AmeriCorps, most of your folks won't engage with this off the bat. Halfway through the year, people are thinking about, okay, what's my next steps? And so that could be doing some resume prep, career research, informational interviews, etc. It is restricted. 20 hours is not enough time to like figure out the next version of yourself or what you're doing, but it is thankfully some hours that they can have and they can count. So when and if it becomes applicable, please know that it is an opportunity. And finally, fundraising. There's very, very, very few folks that ultimately end up doing fundraising. Trying to think if there's anything. I don't know. The only caveat here is they just can't be fundraising for their own position. But if there's some cool fundraising opportunity that they can intersect with, yep, they totally can. And they're just like restricted to 10% of their hours, which is often, a fair amount of hours. And you can be in contact if there's any questions that you have around that. All right, so here's kind of the recipe for what descriptions need to look like. We are entering, hopefully, a more in-person year. So if you're somebody that's watching this training in August, we all have hopes, thoughts, and aspirations that we're going to be able to do much in person. But COVID is still real, and so we don't know how the year will change. That very first category, let's see if I can figure out how to turn on. I used to know how to do the focus. Yeah, most of your folks will be doing on-site service activities. I bet that might not necessarily be true. You might be starting the year with some version of a hybrid reality. And unfortunately, things could change in that we all start the year in a remote reality. But for most people, when they are thinking about their hours, mostly of what is going to be written. Trying to figure out how to. There we go. Most of what people will be writing in their timesheet is on-site service activities, and that's easy. And you're side by side with them, or have support staff that is. And that makes sense. If they are doing something remotely, that's where in their timesheet, they just need to like denote that this is not on-site, aka remote. And here's what I did. I'll have a slide on kind of like guidance on just like overarching things that could be counted as remote. And honestly, all the in-person stuff also can happen remotely. So that's, that's the appropriate thing. So instead of going to in-person class, I did virtual class. Instead of doing in-person meetings, I did virtual meetings, and etc. Only other piece that I'd really highlight that you can see here is training hours. If somebody is doing something remotely, not only does it need the location description, it needs like discrete clarification that you said, yes, this is something that you can do. We will be going over this more in the in-person training. But effectively, somebody can't just pick up a random book in their bookshelf and say, like, I read this book, now I get 3 extra hours. It needs to be something that is meaningfully adding to their work and that you were okay with. But other than that, the simple recipe above of location plus description is exactly is spot on. It's what you need to know. And after your members submit their timesheet, you'll get an automatic email that will be from Encore or mnencorereports.com. And essentially, you need to go through it. And I don't know, the biggest pieces that we regularly see is somebody puts hours without descriptions or descriptions without hours. So, be scanning for that, be scanning to make sure the hours are correct. If your person submits a timesheet on Friday for a pay period that's due next Friday, it's not okay that they said that they did a bunch of hours for the week after. Everything needs to be like definitively true. And so you can't just say that you're going to do time. And the hours also your timesheet needs to be submitted after your hours were served. And then the only other piece I didn't highlight here is if it is a day of a week that somebody's not serving because they have some event, something that they got proof that it was okay that they weren't going to be on site that day. They need to have like approved time off or similar, and it's also going to be true about holidays. Many people won't be serving over, days on fall break or over winter break, and so for those days that there's not programming, they need to have approved time off by supervisor because there might be pieces that they could be doing in order to set themselves up. And as an auditor looks through things, as we're a federal program, it's expected that there's Monday through Friday hours. So if it's a weekday, please make sure that there's some reason on why somebody is not serving during the week. And if something needs to be rejected, I already preface this. Everything in non-core is permanent. Find them offline, send them a text, etc. Just so that way, if there is something that was coaching related or, was a piece that needed to have a good hard conversation on, it's not just part of their permanent record. All right. So with that, I'm going to show you an example, and this will hopefully be a very accurate example of what you could expect your person to be submitting on their first pay period. So I'm doing this example as a September 1st start, and we can thankfully make it so that the first 3 days of service before Labor Day, we can get almost all their training done. So they'll have an intro activity on their first day. They'll have 4 or 5 pre-recorded trainings that they're expected to do, and that will constitute probably 4 hours that day. And then they'll have live virtual trainings with us the day after. There needs to be some disclaimer, even though it makes sense on Labor Day that somebody has 0 hours, that, it was approved time off, it was a holiday. And, the next day they're just on site doing orientation stuff, getting to know students. It was just all on-site service. You don't need to say specifically what it was when it was on site because you were there. You need the description when it was off-site, or if it was training hours or fundraising hours or Life After AmeriCorps hours. And then just to go farther into the week, after the Labor Day holiday on Tuesday, on-site service, like I said. And this is where, if you do have remote hours, so I'm doing this example as a school or community center that's coming back in a hybrid setting, that if it's remote, just have that brief list that you have to have some approval method on that you'll learn about in the live training. But, kind of that brief list of what you did, and that you have a way to verify it, and you'll learn about that more. And you have another example at the very bottom of, somebody having some COVID additional service hours of doing food. They had remote service where they're just meeting with their grade team level and their supervisor. And then, they went home and you theoretically sent them an email or had some version of approving, hey, like you could watch this teaching tolerance webinar and it could be some training hours for you as you start your service. All right, so to jump into remote service just briefly, essentially everything has to be verifiable, and you need to have clear expectations about how things need to happen. And I'll have examples on the next page. Effectively, there has to be some form that you know what your person's doing and are giving them guidance and are approving of it. What that often looks like from this last year, in my experience, is actually the second one, just like the running Google Doc, where you kind of have day or week and the project list of your person to do. And so then that way, when they put, that they did that in their timesheet, you already gave them heads up and expectations that you're doing it. And so it makes sense. It could also be something like an email. You could have like a time tracking system that you're using. It could be a Google form. You'll have more of this. I don't know, I'll be asking a question on how you plan on doing this here within this remote training. And essentially everyone needs to have a meaningful version, and it has to be verifiable. Trying to think if there's anything else I'd spotlight here. All in all, it just needs to be very transparent if somebody external comes and looks. So I would recommend using the running Google Doc in my experience, because I also supervise AmeriCorps people. That is the easiest way to do it. But if you have a different version, I have no desire or need to tell you how to do it. And kind of just as an overarching piece, here's like pre-approved remote activities. Like if they're doing it on site, then of course it's okay that they're doing it off site. They still need to have like where they did it and description. So in their timesheet it would say remote, I did these things. But if they're doing data tracking or creating an assignment or virtual meetings or doing a virtual class with students and being the background and support, of course that's okay, because that would be okay in an in-real or in-person reality. And then similarly, if you're having like COVID activities, all those pieces of doing like food prep or connecting people with resources, like those are all thoughtful pieces that need to happen. I had the one caveat in the prior slide that, it can't be doing for a for-profit institution. But all this stuff is okay. And essentially it needs to have where they did it and a brief description. So that way it can be matched against your verification method, which I had in the previous slide of, either the Google form, the Google Doc, an email that you sent, some version of you saying, yes, it is okay that you are doing these things. And all in all, this won't happen until you have remote hours. But once remote hours happen, a member of our operations team that I introduced on the second slide will reach out to you and say, hey, like we need a copy of how you verified it. So that could be, copying and pasting that section of the Google Doc that you sent. That could be forwarding the email that you used for approval or whatever system. But essentially there has to be some permanent version of what you are using. So then that way we can know, as we're a federally funded program, that there is a system in place and it protects members' hours. And we all are invested in them to make sure that they get their work. So if you have any questions, here's contact information for everyone. I will also pop up a question right now that you can type in. And other than that, thank you very much. Reach out if you need anything. All right, thanks.